God bless everybody. Today it is July 8th of 2023. I have one of the most important videos I've probably ever done. I believe this is going to show us potentially what's going to play out in the next few months between Turkey, Kurds, and how potentially the fall of Iran will happen. I believe this has played out in the past. I believe it's going to play out in the future. We're going to see the same occurring events. I am using a video in this because I think the video gives us a lot of information that I can't really do easily. And so if you go to Epic History TV, you can subscribe, and they have a lot of good content out here. But I'm using their video today to give you a breakdown of history, a history lesson, and what potentially could happen as we move forward in the future. And I think it's extremely important, and it is based off Alexander the Great. And if you follow anything that I do, the Ottoman Empire, Alexander the Great, matter to what is coming up in the future, because I believe past events will happen in the future. So now, before we get into this video, I want you to realize that you have to take this in context, that this is warfare from the past, but it's going to look like warfare in the future. So this is going to deal with tanks and airplanes and drones and battleships and men on the ground and all kinds of different things. So what you see in here, and chariots and horses and different things like that, you realize the context of the past, but you have to realize what's coming up in the future, and this is going to be a technology war as we move forward. Just as it was for Alexander, it was through his technology that allowed him to conquer all these areas. We're going to see that similar thing happen as we move forward, but this will be tanks and other things. But the events will occur exactly the same as they did in the past. In the future, even the battle movements potentially could be exactly the same, and the path that Alexander took as he went through, started in Greece, went through Asia Minor, and ended up taking out the Persian Empire, Egypt, and ended up in Israel. And you're going to see, I believe, how that's going to play out. And I think it'll be extremely interesting to show you how this could develop within the next few months, and why I believe October could play an extremely important time. So let's watch some of this video. I'm going to sift through sections of it so you can see movements and how this plays out. Some of it's fairly graphic, realize that. But I believe it's extremely important to educate you not only in the past of the history of what happened and how that could show us what's going to happen in the future, but realize that God has already shown us everything, and so we just need to understand how to lock those answers. So let's get into this video. I'm going to show you how this transpires and how Alexander comes into power, how he then goes and ends up in Asia Minor, moves through that country, and then ends up in Syria. And from that point of Syria, that's when we're going to pick up the story today, and how it's going to reflect what's happening today. But I want to give you some background up to that point and how that plays out.
In 338 BC, at the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's army crushed the joint forces of Thebes and Athens. Through alliance and conquest, Philip had already gained control over most of his neighbours. Now, following this victory, he united all Greece in an alliance known as the Hellenic League, or
Now this is extremely important, this Hellenic League. Okay, so what I want to show you real quick is where you are in time on Nebuchadnezzar's statue, because that's extremely important in understanding where we are today. So let me try to do this a little different. So when you look at Nebuchadnezzar's statue and you go into the Bible, you got to use the Bible and what it gives us because it's extremely important. You can't radiate out much from what he tells us because once you do that, you just start to distort things. So when you look at chapter 2, you see this statue and how it radiates through the seventh kingdom or the Ottoman Empire and then ends up in the eighth kingdom. But as we move forward, these three kingdoms, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, the Babylonians matter, the Medo-Persians matter, and the Greco-Macedonian Empire matters because this is Alexander the Great's empire here. So when you bring up this and you look at it, you're going to realize that's where we are in this video, but it's going to reflect this footprint in time is going to affect us. So let's see how that works. So if we blow this up, you realize that this is where the Hellenistic League is and is founded, and that's where we are in time. We're in Alexander the Great's portion of history. This is when Persia is conquered, and so you can see this on these charts that I've developed on the front of my web page. You can go to those PDFs and see that. So realize that that's where we're at in time. I just wanted to show you that real quick so that you can understand how these three kingdoms prior, or these two kingdoms prior, and this kingdom forms into this footprint that I've shown you so many times, and how these statues and animals show you what nations are involved and how this is going to play out as we move forward. So let's go back to the video, and I want to show you how he gets down to the point where he actually goes into Asia Minor and then ends up in Syria, because that's the setup for where we're moving to today. Realize that's happened in the past, but this is how Alexander got to power and then moved in and started to attack the Persians or the Iranian army, and this will radiate from Turkey, as it will show you. But this all starts in Greece, and that's important because Greece is part of this area of Alexander's footprint. And you'll notice that Erdogan has been threatening Greece many times, and they're going to be affected by this. Actually, I believe he's going to attack them in this process, and you're going to start to see all these different areas affected, just as they were in the past, are going to be affected in the future as we move forward. So let's watch this, and I'll run through sections of this video because I want to lay this out, and I'll even show you troop movements, because I believe those troop movements are going to be similar to what we're going to see as they play out in the future. It'll happen just as they did in the past, only the militaries will be modernized in the future. So,
League of Corinth, with Philip as hegemon, or supreme commander. Only Sparta stood aside. Philip began to plan a great campaign, a pan-Hellenic or all-Greek war against the Persian Empire. Their old foe was now an ailing superpower, its great riches ripe for the taking. But on the eve of launching his war, Philip was assassinated by his own bodyguard, victim of Macedonia's brutal court rivalries. He was succeeded by his 20-year-old son, Alexander, brilliant, restless, tutored by the great philosopher Aristotle, and already an experienced military commander. Alexander inherited his father's grand plan to invade Persia, but first he had to secure his own position as king. At home, he had potential rivals executed, then crushed rebellions in Illyria, Thessaly, and central Greece. He made a special example of Thebes, completely destroying the ancient city and selling its people into slavery. In the spring of 334 BC, now ready to launch his war against the Persian Empire, Alexander led his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor. It was the start of one of the greatest military campaigns in history.
Now, one thing I want to add is, because these are past armies movements, the time frames are going to be longer because it takes longer to move armies on the ground in the past than they did in the future. So in this modern technology age, we're going to see this ramped up and accelerated, and so these movements are not going to take years. They're potentially going to take weeks or months. And if you go back into Iraq, when we attacked, that shock and awe event occurred in about a week. And so large sections of these areas could be taken out in a fairly short period of time. And with the modern technology of drones, missiles, all kinds of everything from your Navy, and things can be launched from multiple different platforms and different things like that. We're going to see these wars ramp up fairly quickly. So just realize that the time frames in the past are not the time frames of the future. The time frames of the future are going to be much quicker as we move forward. So let's watch a little more of this. Now realize you're in that Macedonia army phase of the bronze hip, okay? And so as we move forward, I want you to realize where you are on time and use the Bible's indicators so that you can determine where this is, how to present it to others also, because you need to explain this to people as we move forward and we start to see this collapse. So I'm going to move you forward in the video a little bit to Granicus. This was a massive battle. It changed the direction of Alexander, and that will lead us into the attack into Syria. So watch how this plays out. This isn't really important today because Turkey is already established, but once you get into Syria, that starts to portray what is going to happen in the near future. But I want to show you how he moved through this area, how this developed, how he gets to Syria, and then what happens right after that, because that's extremely important the way things possibly could happen as we move forward. So but I do want you to understand some of this. It is extremely important. I'm trying to set up this potential battle that's coming up in the next few months.
The great Persian Empire was divided into provinces, called satrapies. Each satrapy was ruled by a governor, or satrap. Those in Asia Minor, now threatened by Alexander's invasion, met to discuss strategy. Memnon of Rhodes, a skilled Greek general in Persian service, urged them to avoid battle with Alexander. Instead, he advised them to use a scorched earth strategy, to burn villages and crops and withdraw to the interior. Alexander's army, he promised, would quickly starve. It was good advice, but the satraps were unwilling to lay waste to their own provinces without a fight.
So this battle turns out to be a real massacre for
the mercenaries were surrounded on all sides and massacred.
So Granicus turned out bad.
Alexander had won a great victory. Asia Minor now lay at his mercy. But the Persian Empire was still a land of immense wealth and power. Already, it was mobilizing its vast resources to face him. If Alexander was to conquer this empire and take his place in history, he'd next have to face Darius, King of Kings himself.
Now we're starting to talk about Darius. Now this is the Kurds. And as we move forward in Daniel 8, we talk about that alignment between the Medes, or the Kurds, and Persia, which is Iran. So this is extremely important that they aren't aligned necessarily right now, but they will as we move forward. And Darius is, or the Kurds are going to be the one that are going to start this, and it's going to collapse down into an Iranian war as these two nations, the Kurds and Iran, align, and we see Turkey run over and crush them potentially within the next few months. And I know that's a fast timeline, but once Turkey drops Sweden and potentially leaves NATO, and we see an attack by the Kurds on Turkey, which I'm going to show you in this video, and I'll show you where I think that could happen and how that could affect us as we move forward, you're going to understand that this could play out exactly the same way as we move forward. So it's extremely important.
Now, as Alexander approached Sardis, capital of the Persian province of Lydia, its commander surrendered without a fight. But before Alexander could advance further, he needed to neutralize Persian naval power. Persia had a powerful fleet with major naval bases around the eastern Mediterranean that could potentially cut his lines of communication back to Greece. Rather than challenge the Persians at sea, Alexander decided to attack its nearest bases, the Greek coastal cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus.
I realize a lot of this has already
Both
happened.
put up determined resistance,
future
but were taken
here.
by winter. The following spring of 333 BC, Alexander continued his advance into Lycia and Phrygia. At Gordium, he was shown the legendary Gordian Knot. A prophecy said that whoever could unpick it would rule all Asia. Alexander simply took his sword and sliced it in half. Meanwhile, Memnon of Rhodes, a skilled Greek general in Persian service, led Persian warships into the Aegean and captured the islands of Chios and Lesbos.
In this area around here.
But
so
after Memnon's sudden death from illness, the offensive was abandoned.
Now we're moving to Syria, and this is where it gets
18 months
interesting.
had
And
passed
watch
since
how
Alexander's
the Medes
army crossed the
attack
Hellespont and invaded the
this
Persian
army.
Empire. Now Alexander led his men into Cilicia and was soon poised to cross the Nur Mountains into Syria. But then the main Persian army, led by King Darius III himself, emerged behind the Greek army to the north.
This is extremely important because if you look at the live maps, the Syrian live maps today, which we can do real quick, let's look at those. Okay, so look at this map, and you're starting to see this massive amount of different things going on in this area over here. This is in that area that we're talking about right now. Okay, the question would be, if this area somehow the Medes would come over and sort of try to block them or cut them off, and then we would see Erdogan have to react to this. So this is extremely important. But realize that if you look at this map, that area we're talking about is right in here. And so it's extremely important. There's been a number of shellings from Turkey going on. You got pro-Assad forces. You just had this indication from pro-Iranian militia issuing a statement clarifying that there's a final chance offering to the Islamic resistance in Iraq to the government that does not extend to Turkey. And so they're not getting along with Turkey, and so this is going to start to break down. But do realize, as you look at the map, this is where you are at this point in time, where Alex was at the time when he was, and this is going to radiate into a number of different directions and areas as we move forward, and that's extremely important, I believe.
Darius was determined to trap and destroy Alexander's army, which he outnumbered almost 2 to 1. So he blocked Alexander's only escape route by moving his army to the coastal plain near Issus, just 6 miles wide, from mountains to sea. The narrow battlefield would force Alexander to fight, but it also prevented Darius exploiting his huge numerical advantage. His army, by some estimates, was up to 100,000 strong, and contained some of the finest soldiers in his vast empire, including 10,000 of his own household troops, known as the Immortals. His best cavalry were massed on his right towards the sea, where the ground was better for horses. His best infantry, his Greek mercenary hoplites, formed the centre. Persian infantry formed his left wing.
I truly believe this
Alexander
battle could
deployed his
play
own
out
army
again.
for battle, once again entrusting his
soon.
left wing, nearest the sea, to Parmenion, with
It's
the Greek
modernized.
cavalry and infantry. In the centre, as always, was the Macedonian phalanx. Alexander positioned himself and his best troops on the right wing, toward the mountain slopes. His elite Agriane javelin throwers, his archers, and behind them the Hypaspists and the companion cavalry. When Alexander saw the strength of the Persian cavalry facing Parmenion on the left, he moved across his Thessalian cavalry to reinforce him. Despite his overwhelming numbers, Darius held his position behind a small river, the Pinarus, and waited for Alexander to attack. He didn't have to wait long. Alexander called out to his men, urging them to fight bravely, picking out some by name. Then, at the head of his army's right wing, he charged. Once again, the speed and shock of the Macedonian advance sent the enemy reeling back.
In this case, Macedonia would be Turkey.
But in the center of the battlefield, the Macedonian phalanx was in trouble. In its effort to keep up with Alexander, its formation had become disordered. Now, in fierce fighting with Darius's Greek mercenaries, the phalanx was slowly being driven back.
Darius or the Medes or the Kurds.
Alexander, seeing the danger, regrouped and led the companions in a headlong charge straight at the Persian center. The Greek mercenaries threatened on their flank were soon in disarray, and the Macedonian phalanx was able to resume its advance. Alexander fought his way towards the great king Darius himself. Rather than face this apparently mad and fearless Macedonian king, Darius fled the battlefield in his royal chariot. Meanwhile, the Macedonian left wing under Parmenion was in a desperate fight against the best of the Persian cavalry. If the Persians could break through here, they could envelop Alexander's army and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But Parmenion and his troops fought doggedly and continued to hold the Persians at bay. As the news that Darius had fled spread among his troops, they abandoned the fight and tried to save themselves. The battle turned into a massacre.
Now realize that the Kurds try to flank Turkey and they're destroyed or massacred in that attack, because I believe this is possibly what's going to happen, because the Kurds are under massive oppression right now as they're being bombed on the northern fronts of Iraq and Syria, and they're probably going to see this attack coming. If they try to get behind them and they're massacred, this will change the game in how Iran's going to be affected. And as you watch this develop, it's going to move down towards Israel as well as towards Iran, and will actually get into Egypt. Okay, and that's why this will develop so quickly, because it shows you how it's going to develop and how quick this is going to happen in a modern day environment. But realize the whole area is going to be encompassed at one time. And Iran will fall in the process, as Egypt is also being under duress and Israel is being surrounded. So let's keep an eye on this. But what I want you to take away from that is this will be a multi-directional attack from Turkey. It'll go to Egypt as well as to the Middle East, and you will watch Iran fall in the same process as Israel is being surrounded. And that's why this is going to happen so quickly, is it's all happening at the same time. So
Ptolemy, one of the Macedonian commanders, told Alexander there were so many Persian dead, his men had used them to fill a deep ravine, so they could cross over it.
it's going to be a massacre, this first attack. It's going to set the tone for what's to come.
The Battle of Issus was a stunning victory for Alexander. And amongst the spoils of victory were Darius's wife, mother, and 3 children, all taken alive and well treated by Alexander.
So there's going to be people that are in captivity, potentially.
With the Persian field army in retreat, Alexander now turned to subduing the western territories of the Persian Empire. The next year, 332, the coastal cities of Phoenicia submitted to Alexander, ending Persian naval power in the Mediterranean. But the island city of Tyre resisted.
Now this is extremely important. Tyre. Tyre is just below Lebanon, or just below Beirut in Lebanon, and Beirut is the capital of Lebanon. And so now we're starting to talk about Hamas, Hezbollah, these different organizations that proxy with Iran, and how Turkey's going to try to help Israel or save Israel from this Assyrian called Iran, and these Kurds, which they consider terrorists, so that they can protect the Temple Mount. I've been talking about that. Erdogan is concerned about that Temple Mount. He will not allow anything to happen to it, so he's going to protect that. If you go to the live maps, I want to show you something real quick. This battle would form up here, as it already is starting to happen. It's going to come down. He's going to destroy this area up in here. He's going to take control of that. He's going to come down here. He's going to end up in Lebanon to Tyre. When you get to here, that's where Beirut is, okay? Beirut is the capital of Lebanon, okay? And so Lebanon's going to fall here in this process. And it's going to affect Hamas and Hezbollah, because as you move forward, you're going to start to see he goes down around Jerusalem and Israel into Gaza, okay? And that's going to be a real problem as he's moving towards Egypt. And he's also going to move to the east towards Syria and Iraq. And I've got a map I want to show you that's going to really hopefully show you exactly what's going to happen here and why this is so important. Okay, so this map is, to me, a gold in a mine. It's so important that we see this map, and I believe this is going to reflect what's coming up. And this is why I believe that I needed to create this video. And it's amazing that if you look at this is Gaugamela, okay, and that's how they say it, is Gaugamela, at least the videos that I watched and how they pronounce this. And that talks about Gog, and I've talked about how Gog is the white horseman and how he's going to bring this quarter of the world into war. But it's interesting, as he's moving south, through Gaza, as it's going to show you here in a minute. He shows you this timeline and path that actually takes you through today's maps, through the Kurdish regions, ends up, as I've been talking about, in Gaugamela, which is Erbil, the regional capital of the Kurdish people, and we have a green zone there. And so that's extremely important. This is a major battle here. Okay, that's the secondary major battle that's going to happen, other than this one that was up here that led into Tyre, where the Medes really got destroyed and massacred. And then he drives south to Tyre, and then he goes further south than that. But he also goes towards the east. As he takes over Egypt, we start to see this movement towards the east, towards the top of the border of Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, and actually takes you into Erbil or Gaugamela and Kirkuk down to Babylon to Shush. And I've talked about this for a while, how this is going to collapse, and you're going to end up in Baghdad. It's going to pull into Shush, and then we're going to watch Turkey come over and crush this nation. This is extremely important because you can follow this area, and right up in here is that tomb of Suleiman Shah around the Euphrates River. And so he's going to control all that area that matters. And if you look at the Kurdistan regions, I think this is extremely important. So let's look at this map real quick. This areas in yellow are the Kurdish regions. You'll see that they only are on the border of Iran and Turkey and in the northern area. So he doesn't care about this middle section much yet, for a reason. Okay, he cares about the Kurds, and then he's going to come down and take Iran out. You look at that map and how it's laid out. He's going to come down through Beirut, take out Lebanon. He's going to then start to resume towards Egypt and Cairo, but he's going to break out of Tyre, come up through Syria, start to round this whole area up. And you also have to realize that these areas in Turkey are going to be affected because they're in Turkey, and there's a massive military event happening along the border here. So that's going to cause them all kinds of problems. And as these people are being pushed to Erbil and Kirkuk, they're going to end up in Baghdad and then shoved over into Shush. And that's what the prophecy says, is he's going to drive them down through this area to pull into this area. And when these two align, and they may have already aligned, I don't know, I can't find that information out, but they're going to have to align because it states they do align somehow. And when that happens, we will see this nation of Turkey come down and crush them. But the reason that he's doing this is he's rounding all these Kurds up, and he's genociding them all the way down into this area here. And he's going to pull them, and then he's going to smash both these nations. Now he's controlling part of Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, so they're going to, have the Taliban come in. Turkmenistan could come in, eliminate some of these areas over here. Turkey's going to come in and crush this whole area here, end up here pulling it, and then you're going to complete Daniel 8 by destruction of Iran and the Medes in this area, which will then put you into an Ezekiel 38 and 39 situation, because they're already in Egypt, as you're going to see through the movements of Alexander the Great as we move forward. But one thing I really want you to understand is this is a multi-pronged, multi-directional attack by Turkey. He's the second largest army in NATO. He has the ability. And if we send him F-16s and other things in the near future, as I've been talking about, they've been trying to get these weapons and stuff so he can shore himself up for this attack that's coming up. He's going to take everything he can off the table so that he can have the ability to do this. And God's going to give him this ability because it's written in prophecy. So let's watch how this plays out. Watch how he spreads. Watch how he ends up skirting around Israel, ends up in Egypt, And as you look at that portion of it, you realize that it's part of the Jeremiah prophecy of 26, chapter 26 through 45, where Egypt and Turkey sort of align with Israel, and then it all falls apart. And what happens? Israel goes against, in this case, Nebuchadnezzar, and they don't pay homage to him. They pay homage to Egypt, but Egypt runs away, and Nebuchadnezzar just takes them over, and it's not even an issue. But they end up in Israel after that, and so it's going to end up bad for Israel, because the prophecy says that Turkey's going to turn against them, but they're going to protect that Temple Mount first, and they're going to eliminate Iran as a problem over there so they can protect that Temple Mount. But the Kurds are going to be in the middle of all this, and so that's extremely important as we move forward.
Tyre's defenders fought bravely and skillfully, even when Alexander began building a causeway to the island, protected by 2 giant siege towers, which they counterattacked with fire ships.
I realize we're into modern
But after 7 months,
here,
the city walls were
this.
breached, and Tyre fell. Most of its citizens were killed or enslaved.
The important part is Tyre falls.
Gaza,
and
too,
then what
was
happens?
taken by siege.
Gaza is taken. Extremely
Alexander
important.
continued to Pelusium on the Nile Delta, where the Persian governor of Egypt surrendered the entire province to Alexander,
He's going to
along with
protect
the
Israel
royal
first.
treasury.
He ends up in Egypt because he's still
At
protecting
Memphis,
Israel. At
priests
least they
of this
think he
ancient
is.
land welcomed Alexander as their liberator from Persian rule, and crowned him pharaoh.
You know, that's really important. He's going to get crowned in Egypt. He's going to also go up to that tomb of Suleiman Shah, which is going to give that Ottoman Empire crown. And in the same breath, Israel is going to be snookered into thinking that Turkey's really here to help them until it starts turning really bad. And you're going to see that as we move forward.
At the mouth of the Nile, he founded a new city, Alexandria. Then travelled to the desert oracle of Siwa, where, according to some accounts, the priests welcomed him as son of Amun,
Notice
king of the
Libya
gods.
is involved here. You also have Ethiopia involved in
Alexander
this.
returned east to Tyre, where in 331 BC he received
Now it
news of
starts
trouble
getting
back
interesting.
home.
He's getting news that he has to go back.
Despite his great victories over the Persians, many Greeks regarded Alexander as a tyrant. King Agis of Sparta, with Persian support, now launched a revolt against Macedonia. Antipater, Alexander's commander in Greece, was already dealing with rebellion in Thrace. But he quickly marched south and met Agis in battle near the city of Megalopolis. Even the legendary Spartans were now no match for Macedonian military power. The Spartan army was crushed.
So Greece is going to fall in this, and they're going to be absorbed into this, as I've been talking about for a while. They're part of that footprint of Alexander the Great. Now, they may not be part of the 10 nations that go against Israel, because they're actually being victimized here to a certain degree. So just realize, though, that they are part of that footprint, and they do matter as we go forward. So I'm going to move this forward in the video a little bit, because I want to keep you on track of what's going on, how this now from Tyre matches up with that map that I was talking about earlier, and I shown you, and how that's going to affect us today towards the Kurds and the potential fall of Iran. So Erdogan's going to move back to Tyre after he gets into Egypt. He's just going to fall quickly. They don't have the ability to deal with him, and so they're just going to capitulate. He's going to end up back in Tyre fairly quickly, and then he's going to rush through this area like it's insane. It's going to be a shock and awe. It's going to be quick, and it's going to be decisive. And realize that the Medes just got defeated up in here, and all this area up here is already being applied military pressure through artillery, bombings, and all these things along the Turkish border. And so once he comes back through here, they're going to be basically squeezed and pushed down out of this area here over to this area, and then down to Babylon, over to Shush, as Daniel 8 tells us that's going to happen. And once they pull down here, they're going to be crushed.
In 334 BC, Alexander, 21-year-old ruler of the small Greek kingdom of Macedonia, led an invasion of the vast Persian Empire. It seemed impossible odds. But thanks to Greek military dominance and Alexander's fearless leadership, he won 2 great battles against the Persians, at the river Granicus and at Issus.
Now, something extremely important here is he's talking about the Grecian armies, okay? This ends up in Turkey. It's all moved, remember? And then we start into that Roman Empire later. But realize that this happens as a Grecian Empire. And when you look at Daniel 8 and Daniel 10, it talks about the Grecian Empire. The king of Greece is going to go up against these nations. And that's what we're talking about, is Turkey here. So realize when he's talking about Grecia or Grecian armies, he's talking about this army that comes out of Turkey, okay? It originally came out of Greece, morphed into Turkey, was established through the Ottoman Empire, has been established in Turkey forever. That's where the seat of Satan is. That's where everything radiates of evil through Satan. That's his prized place on the planet. So we need to understand where this radiates out from. But it originally starts from Greece. That's why he's talking about Grecian armies. It's reestablished in Turkey, and then it moves forward from there.
Having subdued Persian lands west of the Euphrates River, he now headed east into the Empire's
fast he
heartlands,
moves.
seeking a final showdown with the Persian king.
He goes
Darius
right at
III.
him. And he ends up in a place called
Receiving news that a great Persian army led by Darius had assembled at Gaugamela, near modern Mosul in Iraq,
which
he made
is
straight
Erbil
for it.
today.
This was Darius's last chance to stop Alexander, and Alexander's chance to smash Persian power once and for all.
So he's going to rush to Erbil from Tyre. He's going to drive straight through the Kurds. They're going to collapse completely down. They're going to end up in Erbil, in the regional capital of the Kurdistan people, and it's going to collapse. It's going to be a colossal battle. He destroys them in this battle. They shift to the south. They go to Baghdad, end up moving and pulling down into the Shush area. And this is how it's going to happen in the future too. And we need to understand that so we can know what's going to happen as we move forward. But watch this battle and see how decisive it is and how quick it moves, and that it's going to move quicker in the future than it did even in the past. Gaugamela is extremely important. And think about it.
Darius
Gaugamela.
had chosen to
Gog
fight
of
on
Ezekiel
open ground,
38,
where his
39.
advantage in numbers would be more telling. His soldiers had also
It's going
worked
to
hard
morph
to
from
clear and
Daniel 8
flatten the
into
terrain, to make it suitable for Persian
Ezekiel
war
38,
chariots.
39.
By modern estimates, the Persian army was between 50 and 80,000 strong, and
Iran
made up
has
of
to be
contingents
absorbed
from
first.
across the empire. Infantry from Syria and Babylonia. Cavalry.
Now I want to show you these military movements because they're going to be similar in this modern day era of warfare, and how this all plays out and how these areas fall. And I believe that he's already shown us how this sort of plays out. And yes, it is modern warfare, not this type of warfare, but I believe that they will play out similarly.
Cavalry from Armenia, India, and Central Asia. Up to 200 scythed chariots. Even a handful of war elephants. Alexander's army was smaller and may have been outnumbered by as much as 2 to 1. He deployed his units in their usual formation. On the left flank, Thracian and Thessalian cavalry, commanded by Parmenion. In the centre, the Macedonian veterans of the phalanx, each armed with their 18-foot sarissa pike. On the right flank, Alexander with his elite cavalry, the companions, and his best infantry, the hypaspists. These were the units with which Alexander planned to launch his main attack. Greek hoplites formed a second line and supported both wings, which were angled back to guard against encirclement by the Persians.
I think even
The
formations
battle
will be
began
similar.
when Alexander led his wing out to the right, a move that took the Persians by surprise. Could Alexander really be trying to encircle their huge army? The Persians mirrored his movement, taking troops away from their centre to outflank Alexander and prevent him leaving the area they'd cleared for the Persian chariots. But Alexander's unusual maneuver was a trap to entice the Persians to weaken their centre. When he saw that it had worked, he ordered his Greek cavalry to charge, to keep the Persians fixed in position. A giant cavalry battle developed on the right wing. Darius, meanwhile, judging this to be the decisive moment, unleashed his chariots. Expert Agrianes javelin throwers took out horses and crews, while the Greek infantry opened lanes, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through. Now Alexander led his companion cavalry and parts of the Macedonian phalanx in a headlong charge straight at the weakened Persian centre, fighting his way towards Darius himself. The sudden ferocity of Alexander's assault threw the Persians into panic. The centre of the army broke and ran, King Darius himself leading the rout. But Alexander's left wing was in serious trouble. Parmenion, facing a huge onslaught by Persian cavalry, was virtually surrounded. Indian and Scythian horsemen had even ridden through a gap in the Greek line. But rather than wheeling and attacking the Greeks from behind, they'd carried straight on to loot their camp. Parmenion sent a desperate appeal to Alexander for help. The king abandoned his pursuit of Darius, regrouped, and charged the Persian right wing. It was the hardest and bloodiest fighting of the battle, claiming the lives of 60 of Alexander's companions. Finally, as news of Darius's flight spread across the battlefield, the last Persian horseman turned and fled. The Battle of Gaugamela was a stunning and complete victory for Alexander. According to ancient sources, he lost just a few hundred men, while the Persians lost thousands. Alexander had routed Darius's great army. And now the road to Babylon, the empire's main capital, lay open.
So he's going to take the
The
capital of
Macedonian
Iraq
king
out.
entered the great city in triumph, recognized by Persian officials as its new rightful ruler.
And then he goes to Susa.
So too at the city of Susa, where Alexander ceremonially took his seat upon the royal throne of Persia. In the Zagros Mountains, at a pass known as the Persian Gates, a courageous Persian force held up Alexander's army for a month. The Greeks eventually found a mountain path that bypassed their position, allowing them to encircle and wipe out the defenders. In early 330 BC, Alexander reached Persepolis, the empire's ceremonial capital. Alexander wanted to appear as a liberator to the Persians, as a legitimate successor to King Darius.
So what's important here is when you look at that map, you realize that nothing is going to stop Erdogan or Turkey from accomplishing this goal based on prophecy, and that we're going to watch these Medes collapse fairly quickly. They're going to lose 2 or 3 decisive battles. They're going to end up down in Baghdad, pulled into Shush, and then Turkey's going to come down and crush them. This completes Daniel 8 at that moment, and Iran is absorbed into this nation that's going to turn into 10 full nations that are going to end up in Israel. And so if you go out and you look at that Middle East map, you realize this is going to develop quickly through modern technology. It's going to move quickly, and it's going to move forward based on how prophecy is laid out, and I believe he's already given us that direction. So once he takes out Shush in this area here, he's going to then come back over, and he's going to end up between the 2 seas, and he's going to attack Israel. Realize this area is already encompassed because he's gone from Beirut over here all the way down to Cairo and built this city called Alexander. And I talk about those stones that are placed in the ground there and how he just doesn't go any further. Now it shows that he's, paid homage and different things in all these different areas and things like that, but the military really doesn't get any further because they capitulate here. And so this is extremely important. But realize that this is why Iran has to fall first. They end up in Egypt. They get pulled between the 2 seas. This area is already under major duress because Turkey's already moved down through here and into Cairo. Egypt's already basically capitulated to a certain degree, and we're watching Jerusalem basically surrounded at that moment. So it's not going to be a real problem for Turkey to come back, sit between the 2 seas, and get ready to attack this nation. But I think it's extremely important that if you go from Tyre, which is going to affect Damascus, and it goes right through right by Damascus. If you look at that map, it's going to go right through Damascus. It's going to move up into this area here. You're going to come up through the homes. It's going to come over. He's going to end up here. If you bring this over, you're going to end up in Iraq over in Erbil. Okay, so he's going to come up. He's going to follow this northern border all the way over. He's going to end up in this area up in here, down towards Mosul, towards Erbil, down towards Kirkuk, down to Baghdad, and then his last stop will be Shush, which is right around in this area here. And that's when the prophecy of Daniel 8 will complete itself. I wanted to bring this to you because I believe that past is going to reappear in the future, and we're going to have this reoccurring event that's already been portrayed in the past by Alexander the Great. If you look at that statue area that I've shown you so many times, you'll realize that the footprint that we're talking about is Alexander the Great, or the Ottoman Empire's footprint. And I've shown you this on the chart many, many times, that when Daniel has a dream, he talks about these 4 beasts, how these 4 beasts reflect the 3 kings, or these 3 beasts reflect these kingdoms in the past, how they're going to remorph into a conglomeration of kingdoms as a 4th kingdom, of the beast kingdom in the future, how in the past you saw the lion, the bear, and the leopard, which is Iraq, Iran, and Turkey, form into this footprint of the Ottoman Empire. And if you break out the 12 chapters of Daniel, which I did in that third PDF on my front page of my website, that you'll realize that he's talking about very specific areas that are going to form into a beast kingdom based on these three beast kingdoms prior, or these three animal kingdoms based on the chapters that he shows you. They radiate out to a footprint. That footprint consolidated down and overlaid turns into this footprint. Wow, it looks like what we just saw. That's what I'm telling you. You guys need to understand this has nothing to do with Europe. It has nothing to do with Russia. And if you go back to the statue and the things that he gives you and not follow these entrails to a point where Daniel could have never understood this stuff, you'll be better off. And when you realize that these footprints that he's given you based on these different animals end up being an Ottoman footprint or a Alexander the Great footprint, this will conglomerate down into a fourth beast kingdom because he overthrows three kingdoms and it turns into one full kingdom called a beast kingdom, which is basically a quarter of the world. It's not the whole world that's under control of the beast kingdom, but the whole world will be affected by this beast kingdom. So we need to understand how this all lays out. But realize that when you bring this up and you look at these footprints, which I'll do real quick, hopefully I can do this for you, you realize that these footprints are extremely important in understanding how this plays out and how it looks. So when you get into Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, you can see the footprint. When you get into the Medo-Persian footprint, you can see that. And when you get into Alexander's footprint, it looks similar. And when you consolidate all of these areas into what? It turns into Ezekiel 38 and 39. But what happens first. Daniel 8 has to happen first. They have to absorb Iran first. And if you go into Alexander's world in history, you'll see how that actually happens. So be aware of these things. Realize that this could play out before October of this month based on my paradigm that I've shown you, and that we're going to watch potentially this NATO issue where Turkey denies Sweden, or they just leave NATO and they start this campaign. But I talked about potentially we would see how the Kurds might actually initiate a attack against Turkey, try to cut them off because they're pressuring them in that western border area between Syria and Turkey, and they might try to cut them off, and that would actually start this chain of events as you've seen in Alexander the Great and in this video. So God bless everybody. I hope this clarifies some things. I think it's extremely important. I'll show you that map one more time so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But I believe the Battle of Gaugamela is so important to where we're heading, and that it has to follow Alexander's route, and that it will, because Daniel 8 tells us that is what's going to happen. And so we need to understand this. And this is why everybody thinks it's a history lesson, because it happened in the past. It's going to reoccur in the future. You need to understand that. You need to see this so that you can understand what's coming, so that then you can tell others when you see it happening and explain it to them easier. And please share this video and show it to other people so they know what's coming, because if you're not telling people, then we're not doing our jobs as Christians to give people proper information. And I don't know if this is actually going to play out. We're going to know within the next few months. So we'll see what happens. But based on history, this is what will happen, and this is how it will play out. So God bless everybody. Be safe out there. If you're not prepping, please do so. Get your water, your food, different things ready. We just had a major catastrophe in Illinois that showed us what our holes were, what we needed to work on, what things we need to get prepping and ready. And I believe we should do this all in the next 3 or 4 months so we're ready for what's getting ready to come up. And it is going to get ugly out here. As this breaks down and the Middle East devolves, we're going to see these fuel prices start to rise up to a potential 3-digit figure again. That will hyperinflate and stagnate the whole world. And it's just going to exacerbate the problem. And so please get ready. It's so important that you find the open door. It's so important that you find Jesus. We have to get through the next, I show 1,547 days to get to the end of the story. Have a great night.